In a small, quiet town where life moved at a slow pace, racial tensions simmered beneath the surface, hidden but always present. It was one of those ordinary evenings when everything seemed calm, yet something extraordinary was about to unfold. Marcus Thompson, a 16-year-old black teenager with big dreams and a heart full of hope, found himself at the center of an incident that would change not only his life, but also the lives of those around him. Marcus was no stranger to challenges. Growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and prejudices ran deep, he had learned early on to work harder than most, just to be noticed. But none of that dampened his spirit. He was known for his cheerful smile, his love for basketball, and his determination to rise above the circumstances that sought to hold him back. Every day after school, Marcus could be seen practicing his shots on the cracked asphalt court near his house. Basketball wasn't just a hobby for him. It was his escape, his passion, and his ticket to a better future. On this particular evening, Marcus had stayed late at practice. His coach had praised his skills, telling him he had real potential if he kept working hard. Those words echoed in Marcus's mind as he walked home, dribbling his worn-out basketball rhythmically against the pavement. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. The air was cool and the world felt peaceful. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to dream about college scholarships, cheering crowds, and standing victorious on a basketball court far bigger than the one he knew. But peace is fragile, especially in places where fear and bias lurk in plain sight. As Marcus turned onto a dimly lit street, he noticed a police car parked at the corner. At first, he didn't think much of it. Police cars were a common sight in the neighborhood, though their presence often made people uneasy. Still, Marcus continued walking, his focus split between keeping his dribble steady and thinking about dinner waiting for him at home. Then, without warning, the patrol car's headlights flicked on, illuminating the narrow road. The vehicle rolled forward slowly until it was parallel to Marcus. Its engine idled loudly, breaking the silence of the evening. "Hey, you!" One of the officers inside called out, his voice sharp and commanding. Marcus stopped abruptly, startled. His basketball bounced away, rolling a few feet before coming to rest against the curb. He turned toward the car, confusion etched on his face. "What's in the bag?" the officer asked, leaning slightly out of the window. His tone carried an edge of suspicion, as though Marcus had done something wrong simply by existing there. Marcus blinked, taken aback. "It's just my stuff," he replied hesitantly, gesturing to the backpack slung over his shoulder. Inside were his textbooks, gym clothes, and a water bottle, nothing more, nothing less. But the officer didn't seem satisfied. Without another word, he stepped out of the car, followed closely by his partner. Both men wore uniforms that gave them authority, but their expressions betrayed something else. Disdain. They approached, Marcus with deliberate steps, their boots crunching against the gravel beneath their feet. "Empty it out," the first officer ordered, pointing to the ground. His voice left no room for argument. Marcus hesitated, unsure of what to do. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. He hadn't broken any laws. He was just a kid heading home from practice. Yet here he was, being treated like a suspect. Slowly, reluctantly, Marcus knelt down and unzipped his backpack. Out spilled his belongings, a crumpled notebook, a textbook with dog-eared pages, a pair of sneakers, and a faded t-shirt. He laid each item carefully on the sidewalk, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity despite the humiliation washing over him. The officers watched silently, their arms crossed. When Marcus finished, they began rifling through his things, tossing items aside carelessly. One of them picked up the notebook and flipped through its pages, sneering at the scribbles inside. "What's this?" he asked, holding up a piece of paper Marcus had tucked inside. It was a handwritten list of colleges he hoped to apply to someday. Names like Duke University and UCLA were scrawled in bold letters, reminders of the future Marcus dreamed of building for himself. Instead of admiration, however, the officer let out a mocking laugh. "Look at this," he said to his partner. "Thinks he's gonna be somebody, huh?" Marcus clenched his fists, fighting back tears. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, but years of living in a place where speaking up could make things worse kept him silent. The officers weren't done yet. Their gaze shifted to the basketball lying nearby. "Where'd you get that?" the second officer demanded, kicking it lightly with his foot. "Did you steal it?" "No," Marcus exclaimed, his voice cracking under the weight of frustration. "It's mine, I've had it forever." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The officers exchanged glances, then nodded to each other. Before Marcus could react, they grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back. Cold metal clicked into place as handcuffs locked around his wrists. "You're coming with us," one of them said gruffly, shoving him toward the patrol car. Marcus stumbled, his mind racing with disbelief. How could this be happening? What had he done wrong? As the car drove away, leaving behind the scattered remnants of Marcus's belongings, a small crowd began to gather at the scene. Neighbors peeked out of windows, curious and concerned. Among them was Clara Bennett, a middle-aged woman taking her dog for an evening stroll. She had seen the entire exchange unfold and couldn't shake the feeling of unease settling in her chest. Something about the way the officers had treated Marcus felt wrong, unnecessarily cruel, almost predatory. Her eyes scanned the ground, where his torn notebook lay open, its pages fluttering gently in the breeze. Nearby, the deflated basketball sat abandoned, a symbol of innocence crushed under the weight of prejudice. Clara stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. She wasn't someone who typically got involved in such matters. A librarian by profession, she spent most of her days surrounded by books, preferring the quiet solitude of her work to the chaos of public life. But tonight, something stirred. Within her, a sense of responsibility she couldn't ignore. Pulling out her phone, she snapped photos of the scene, the discarded items, the empty street, the lingering aura of injustice. Then with trembling fingers, she typed out a post describing what she had witnessed. She tagged local news outlets, civil rights organizations, and anyone else she thought might care. Within minutes, her message was live, spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. Little did Clara know her simple act of documentation would ignite a chain reaction. By morning, hashtags like Justice for Marcus and End Racial Profiling were trending online. Screenshots of her post circulated widely, accompanied by outraged comments and calls for accountability. People demanded answers. Why had Marcus been targeted? What evidence justified his arrest? And why did incidents like this keep happening in communities of color? The questions hung heavy in the air, unanswered, but impossible to ignore. For Marcus, the night stretched endlessly. Sitting alone in the backseat of the patrol car, he replayed the events in his mind, searching for answers that wouldn't come. He thought about his mother, who would surely be worried sick. He thought about his dreams, now overshadowed by fear and anger. Most of all, he thought about the injustice of it all, the sheer randomness of being singled out because of the color of his skin. Tears streamed down his face, but he wiped them away quickly, refusing to let despair take hold completely. Somewhere deep inside, a spark of defiance remained. If nothing else, he vowed to survive this ordeal, to prove that he was stronger than the hatred aimed at him. And so, as the clock ticked toward midnight, the stage was set for a story of resilience, courage, and unexpected alliances. Marcus's journey was far from over, but already seeds of change were being planted. In the days to come, his voice and the voices of those who stood with him would echo louder than ever before, challenging the status quo and demanding justice. The clock struck midnight, and the small town that had once been cloaked in silence was now buzzing with unrest. News of Marcus Thompson's arrest spread like wildfire, fueled by Clara Bennett's viral post. What started as a quiet evening, for many turned into a night of heated discussions both online and offline. The image of Marcus's scattered belongings on the sidewalk, a crumpled notebook, a deflated basketball, and torn pages of his college aspirations, became symbols of something much larger than one teenager's misfortune. It was a stark reminder of the systemic racism and unchecked power dynamics that plagued communities across the nation. Clara, still reeling from what she had witnessed, couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone as notifications poured in. Her simple act of documenting the scene had sparked outrage far beyond what she could have imagined. People were sharing her post, commenting on it, and tagging influential figures who might amplify the message. Local activists reached out to thank her for speaking up, while others criticized her for getting involved. What if I hadn't posted? Clara wondered aloud to herself. The thought sent a chill down her spine. Would anyone have cared? Or would Marcus's story have faded into obscurity, dismissed as just another case of kids being kids? By morning, the hashtag #JusticeForMarcus dominated social media feeds. Screenshots of Clara's post were everywhere, accompanied by angry captions and calls for accountability. Journalists began reaching out, eager to investigate the incident. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning the officers' actions and demanding an immediate inquiry. Protesters started organizing rallies outside the police station, determined to make their voices heard. Meanwhile, Marcus remained locked in a cold, sterile holding cell, unaware of the storm brewing on his behalf. Inside the cell, time moved impossibly slowly. Marcus sat on the hard bench, his hands clasped tightly together. The handcuffs had been removed, but their memory lingered. The sharp bite of metal against skin, the humiliation of being treated like a criminal. He replayed the events over and over in his mind, searching for some way to make sense of it all. Had he done anything wrong? No. Was there any evidence to justify his arrest? None that he could think of. So why was this happening? His thoughts drifted to his mother, Evelyn Thompson. She worked long hours as a nurse, often coming home exhausted but always finding time to check on him. Marcus knew she'd be frantic when she realized he wasn't home. She'd probably call his coach, his friends, anyone who might know where he was. And then eventually, she'd find out the truth, that her son was sitting in a jail cell, accused of nothing more than existing while black. The thought made his chest tighten. He hated the idea of her worrying, of her having to deal with yet another injustice in a world that seemed determined to stack the odds against them. As dawn broke, Evelyn received the dreaded phone call. A police officer informed her in clipped and impersonal tones that Marcus was in custody and needed to be picked up. Shocked and terrified, she rushed to the station, her mind racing with questions. Why was he arrested? What charges were filed? How could they treat a child this way? When she arrived, she was met with bureaucratic hurdles, forms to fill out, fees to pay, explanations that made little sense. Each step felt like a deliberate attempt to wear her down, to remind her of her place in a system that rarely favored people like her. But Evelyn wasn't someone who gave up easily. A single mother raising 2 children in a tough neighborhood, she had learned to fight for what mattered. Sitting in the waiting area, she clenched her fists and vowed to get her son back no matter what it took. Hours passed before Marcus was finally released into her arms. Seeing him, his face pale, his eyes red from crying, broke her heart. But she held him close, whispering words of reassurance. "We'll get through this," she told him firmly. "This isn't your fault." Outside the station, the scene was chaotic. Protesters had gathered, holding signs that read, "Stop racial profiling and justice for Marcus." Their chants echoed through the streets, "No justice, no peace." Reporters jostled for position, microphones thrust toward anyone willing to speak. Cameras flashed, capturing Evelyn and Marcus as they emerged from the building. For a moment, they stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sight of so many people rallying for them. Then Evelyn stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "They didn't do anything wrong," she said, gesturing to Marcus. "He's just a boy. All he did was walk home from basketball practice." "How is that? A crime?" Her words resonated deeply, drawing murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Someone handed her a megaphone and she continued, her voice growing stronger with each sentence. "We're not going to stay silent anymore. This has to stop. Our children deserve better." The protests gained momentum throughout the day. More people joined, including students from Marcus's school, local activists, and even strangers who had seen the story online. They marched through the streets, blocking traffic and chanting slogans. Some carried banners featuring Clara's photos of Marcus's belongings, turning the personal tragedy into a powerful visual statement. Others distributed flyers with information about upcoming rallies and legal resources for victims of racial profiling. The energy was electric, a mix of anger, sadness, and hope. Back at her apartment, Clara watched the news coverage unfold, feeling a swirl of emotions. Pride, fear, and determination battled within her. On one hand, she was amazed by how quickly the community had mobilized. On the other, she worried about potential backlash for herself, for Marcus, for everyone involved. Posting that video had been risky, but she couldn't bring herself to regret it. If staying silent meant complicity, then she would rather face whatever consequences came her way. Reporters soon found their way to Clara's doorstep. At first, she hesitated to talk, unsure of how much attention she wanted. But as she saw the impact of her post, the way it galvanized people to take action, she realized she had a responsibility to keep speaking up. Inviting a few journalists inside, she recounted the events of the previous night in vivid detail. She described the casual cruelty of the officers, the look of confusion and fear on Marcus's face, and the eerie silence of the street as the patrol car drove away. Her words painted a picture so clear, so raw that viewers couldn't help but feel outraged. One reporter asked her why she decided to intervene. Clara paused, choosing her words carefully. "I don't think I did anything special," she admitted. "I just couldn't stand by and let it happen. When you see something wrong, you have to say something. Silence doesn't fix anything. It only makes things worse." Her response struck a chord, earning her praise from viewers and commentators alike. Overnight, Clara went from being an ordinary librarian to a symbol of courage and moral integrity. Meanwhile, legal experts reviewed the case, noting glaring violations of Marcus's rights. The lack of probable cause, the unnecessary use of force, and the dismissive attitude of the officers all pointed to misconduct. A pro bono lawyer named Daniel Hayes stepped forward to represent Marcus, filing lawsuits against both the individual officers and the police department. Daniel was known for taking on high-profile civil rights cases, and his involvement added weight to the growing movement. In press conferences, he emphasized the need for accountability and systemic reform. "This isn't just about Marcus," he declared. "It's about every young person who's been targeted because of the color of their skin. We can't keep letting this happen." The pressure mounted on the police department. Faced with mounting criticism and calls for transparency, officials issued a vague statement defending their actions. They claimed the officers followed standard procedures and acted based on reasonable suspicion. But their defense rang hollow, especially when footage from nearby security cameras surfaced, showing Marcus walking peacefully before the encounter. The video contradicted the officers' claims, further fueling public outrage. As the days passed, the case became a national conversation. Celebrities tweeted about it, late-night hosts discussed it on air, and politicians weighed in during interviews. Even schools incorporated the incident into classroom discussions, encouraging students to think critically about issues of race, power, and justice. For Marcus, the attention was overwhelming. Strangers sent letters of support, offering kind words and donations for his education. Classmates organized fundraisers, selling t-shirts and hosting bake sales to raise money for his future. Though touched by the outpouring of love, Marcus struggled to reconcile the kindness with the trauma of his experience. He couldn't shake the feeling that none of this should have happened in the first place. Yet amidst the chaos, a glimmer of hope emerged. Marcus began attending community meetings alongside his mother, listening to stories from others who had faced similar injustices. He realized he wasn't alone, that countless families had endured pain far greater than his own. Inspired by their resilience, he decided to use his platform to make a difference. With Clara's encouragement, he agreed to speak at a rally, sharing his story with hundreds of people gathered in the park. Standing behind a podium, his voice trembling but resolute, He spoke about the dreams he refused to let die. "They tried to break me," he said, clutching the microphone. The momentum sparked by Marcus Thompson's arrest showed no signs of slowing down. What began as a single act of documentation by Clara Bennett had evolved into a full-blown movement, drawing attention not just locally, but across the country. The small town, once known only for its quiet streets and unassuming residents, was now at the center of a national conversation about racial profiling, police accountability, and systemic injustice. For Marcus, the weight of this newfound visibility was both a burden and a source of strength. Days after his release from custody, Marcus found himself navigating a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, he felt immense gratitude for the support pouring in from strangers and friends alike. Letters filled with encouragement arrived daily, many accompanied by small donations to help fund his education. Local businesses offered free meals to his family, and classmates who barely spoke to him before were suddenly organizing fundraisers in his name. Yet, despite the outpouring of kindness, Marcus couldn't escape the lingering sense of violation and fear. Every time he stepped outside, he wondered if someone might recognize him, not as the boy who dreamed of playing basketball for Duke University, but as the teenager handcuffed and humiliated by police officers on a random street corner. His mother, Evelyn Thompson, became his rock during these turbulent times. A woman of quiet determination, Evelyn refused to let anger consume her or her son. Instead, she channeled her energy into ensuring Marcus stayed focused on his goals. "This is their mess, not yours," she told him firmly one evening as they sat together in their modest living room. "We're going to rise above it." Her words carried a weight that resonated deeply with Marcus, though he struggled to see how he could move forward without letting bitterness take root. He trusted his mother's wisdom. She reminded him often that his worth wasn't defined by what others thought of him. It was measured by what he chose to do next. Clara Bennett, too, faced challenges of her own. As her role in exposing the incident grew more prominent, so did the scrutiny directed at her. Some praised her as a hero, crediting her quick thinking and moral courage for sparking change. Others accused her of exaggerating the situation or seeking attention. Online trolls targeted her social media accounts, leaving hateful comments and even threats. At first, the negativity rattled her. She spent sleepless nights wondering if she'd made a mistake by speaking up. But then she remembered Marcus. The look of confusion and fear etched on his face as the officers treated him like a criminal, and knew she couldn't have stayed silent. To cope with the backlash, Clara leaned on the same principles that guided her life: empathy, integrity, and resilience. She continued giving interviews, using each opportunity to highlight the broader issues at play. In one televised appearance, she recounted the moment she decided to post the photos and videos online. "I didn't think about whether it was brave or risky," she explained. "I just knew it was right. If you see something wrong, you can't pretend it's not happening. You have to act." Her sincerity struck a chord with viewers, earning her widespread admiration. Slowly but surely, the tide turned in her favor. Supporters rallied around her, defending her against critics and amplifying her message. Meanwhile, the legal battle heated up. Daniel Hayes, Marcus's pro bono lawyer, worked tirelessly to build a case against the officers involved. He gathered evidence, including security camera footage showing Marcus walking peacefully before the encounter, witness testimonies from bystanders, and expert opinions on police conduct. The lawsuit accused the officers of violating Marcus's constitutional rights, specifically targeting his Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. It also named the police department, alleging negligence in training and oversight. The pressure mounted on the authorities. Facing mounting public outrage and potential financial liability, the police department placed the two officers involved on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. While this move was seen as a step in the right direction, activists argued it wasn't enough. "Administrative leave isn't accountability," Daniel said during a press conference. "These officers need to face real consequences for their actions, and the department needs to implement meaningful reforms to prevent incidents like this from happening again." The call for reform extended beyond the police department. Community leaders organized town hall meetings to discuss ways to address systemic racism and inequality. Teachers incorporated discussions about racial justice into their lesson plans, encouraging students to reflect on privilege and bias. Local churches hosted prayer vigils, uniting people of different faiths under a shared commitment to healing and progress. Even businesses joined the effort, pledging to hire more diverse staff and support minority-owned enterprises. For Marcus, participating in these initiatives was both empowering and exhausting. He attended rallies, spoke at events, and met with other young activists fighting similar battles in their own communities. Each interaction reinforced his belief that he wasn't alone, that countless others had endured far worse and yet continued to push for change. Still, the constant attention took its toll. There were days when he longed for normalcy, for the simplicity of dribbling a basketball on the cracked asphalt court near his house, without worrying about cameras or reporters trailing him. One particularly transformative moment came when Marcus visited a nearby city to speak at a youth summit. The event brought together teenagers from various backgrounds, all united by a desire to create a better future. As Marcus stood on stage sharing his story with an audience of hundreds, he noticed something remarkable. The room fell silent, hanging on to every word. When he finished, applause erupted, echoing through the auditorium. Several attendees approached him afterward, thanking him for inspiring them to speak out against injustice. One girl, barely older than him, handed him a folded piece of paper. Inside was a drawing of a basketball with the words, "Keep Rising," written boldly across it. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes as he realized the impact of his voice, how it could resonate far beyond his wildest dreams. Back home, Clara continued advocating alongside Marcus and his family. She attended rallies, gave speeches, and collaborated with local organizations to push for policy changes. Together, they drafted proposals calling for mandatory body cameras for all officers, increased transparency in investigations, and comprehensive bias training programs. Their efforts gained traction, with city officials agreeing to consider the recommendations. While progress was slow, the fact that leaders were listening gave everyone hope. As weeks turned into months, the case prompted tangible changes within the police department. New guidelines were introduced, emphasizing de-escalation techniques and stricter protocols for stops and searches. Officers underwent additional training sessions designed to address implicit biases and improve community relations. Though skeptics questioned whether these measures would truly make a difference, optimists pointed to them as steps toward lasting reform. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast in his resolve. He returned to basketball practice, channeling his frustrations into every shot he took. His teammates rallied around him, offering unwavering support. Even his coach noticed a shift in his demeanor, a newfound maturity and purpose driving him to excel. Off the court, Marcus threw himself into his studies, determined to prove that nothing, not racism, not fear, not hatred, could derail his dreams. By the end of the year, Marcus received news that brought tears to his eyes. He had been accepted into a prestigious summer program for aspiring athletes. The scholarship covered tuition, housing, and travel expenses, giving him access to resources he never imagined possible. As he read the acceptance letter aloud to his mother, Evelyn beamed with pride. "You earned this," she said, hugging him tightly. "Don't ever forget that." Though the scars of that fateful night would always remain, Marcus learned to carry them differently, as reminders of his strength rather than symbols of defeat. With Clara by his side and a community standing behind him, he embraced the journey ahead, knowing that true justice wasn't just about holding individuals accountable. It was about creating a world where no child had to endure what he did. And in that pursuit, Marcus discovered a power greater than any obstacle, the power of unity, resilience, and hope. As the months rolled on, the ripple effects of Marcus Thompson's case continued to spread far beyond the small town where it all began. What had started as a single act of injustice transformed into a catalyst for change, touching lives and sparking conversations that transcended borders, generations, and backgrounds. For Marcus, the journey was both transformative and challenging, a delicate balance between healing from trauma and embracing his newfound role as a symbol of resilience. The summer program Marcus attended marked a turning point in his life. Held at a sprawling university campus, the program brought together talented young athletes from across the country, each with their own stories of struggle and triumph. From the moment he arrived, Marcus felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced before. Here, among peers who shared his passion for basketball and understood the weight of adversity, he found solace. The rigorous training sessions pushed him physically, while workshops on leadership and personal growth challenged him mentally. Coaches praised his work ethic, noting how his determination set him apart from others. But it wasn't just the skills he honed on the court that made the experience unforgettable. It was the connections he formed off it. One evening, sitting around a campfire with fellow participants, Marcus opened up about his arrest and the subsequent movement it sparked. His voice trembled at first, but as he spoke, the group listened intently, their faces reflecting a mix of shock, empathy, and admiration. When he finished, one of the older teens, a girl named Jasmine, spoke up. "You're not just a basketball player," she said firmly. "You're a leader. People look up to you because you stood tall when the world tried to knock you down." Those words stayed with Marcus long after the program ended. They reminded him of why he couldn't afford to give up. Not on himself, not on his dreams, and certainly not on the fight for justice. Returning home, he carried with him not only improved athletic abilities, but also a renewed sense of purpose. He vowed to use his platform to inspire others, especially those who felt voiceless or powerless. Back in his hometown, the momentum for reform showed no signs of slowing. Clara Bennett remained deeply involved, working tirelessly alongside activists, lawyers, and community leaders to push for systemic changes within law enforcement. Her efforts were met with both praise and resistance, but she refused to back down. In interviews, she emphasized the importance of sustained advocacy. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she often said. "It takes persistence, patience, and unity. We've come a long way, but there's still so much work to be done." One of the most significant victories came when the City Council approved funding for body cameras for all police officers. This decision was accompanied by stricter accountability measures, including independent oversight committees tasked with reviewing misconduct allegations. While some critics dismissed these reforms as superficial, others saw them as crucial steps toward transparency and trust building. Daniel Hayes, Marcus's lawyer, called it a start, acknowledging that true transformation would require deeper cultural shifts within institutions. For Evelyn Thompson, watching her son navigate this new chapter filled her with pride and occasional worry. She knew the spotlight wouldn't fade anytime soon, and she feared the toll it might take on Marcus, but she also recognized the unique opportunity he had to make a difference. "Don't let fear stop you," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch sipping lemonade. "You've been given a chance to shine a light where it's needed most. That's a gift, even if it comes wrapped in pain." Marcus took his mother's advice to heart. Over the next few months, he became increasingly active in speaking engagements, panel discussions, and community events. He traveled to neighboring towns, sharing his story with audiences ranging from high school students to seasoned policymakers. Each speech refined his message, blending raw honesty with calls to action. He talked about the night he was arrested, yes, but he also highlighted the strength of his family, the courage of Clara, and the collective power of the community that rallied behind him. By focusing on solutions rather than dwelling solely on problems, he inspired people to believe in the possibility of change. Clara, too, evolved in her role as an advocate. No longer content with simply documenting injustices, she began organizing educational workshops aimed at fostering dialogue between residents and law enforcement. These sessions, held in libraries and community centers, encouraged open conversations about bias, privilege, and mutual respect. At first, attendance was sparse, with many officers reluctant to participate, but over time, curiosity outweighed skepticism, leading to meaningful exchanges that bridged divides. Clara's quiet demeanor and genuine desire to understand different perspectives earned her respect from skeptics and supporters alike. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. The two officers involved in Marcus's arrest faced disciplinary hearings, but the outcomes were mixed. One was suspended without pay, while the other received a mere reprimand. Though disappointed, Marcus and his allies chose to focus on the bigger picture. "We're not fighting against individuals," Daniel explained during a press conference. "We're fighting against systems that allow such behavior to occur unchecked. Holding people accountable is important, but dismantling the structures that enable abuse is what will create lasting justice." This perspective resonated with many, galvanizing grassroots movements focused on education and policy reform. Schools incorporated lessons on racial equity into their curricula, teaching children as young as elementary age about fairness, inclusion, and allyship. Local businesses pledged to hire more diverse staff and support minority entrepreneurs. Even churches joined the effort, hosting interfaith dialogues and service projects aimed at strengthening community bonds. Amidst the whirlwind of activity, Marcus never lost sight of his personal goals. Balancing activism with academics proved challenging, but he managed to maintain excellent grades, earning recognition from teachers and mentors. His basketball team advanced to regional championships, thanks in part to his standout performance. Off the court, he mentored younger players, offering guidance not only on technique, but also on navigating life's hurdles with grace and grit. "Basketball taught me discipline," he once told a group of middle schoolers, "but life taught me resilience. You need both to succeed." As the year drew to a close, Marcus reflected on how far he'd come since that fateful night. He thought about the strangers who had sent letters of encouragement, the classmates who organized fundraisers, and the activists who marched alongside him. He thought about Clara, whose simple act of bravery ignited a chain reaction of hope. And he thought about his mother, whose unwavering love kept him grounded through every high and low. In December, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a national conference on youth empowerment. Standing on stage before thousands of attendees, he felt a surge of gratitude for the hardships that shaped him, for the people who supported him, and for the future he dared to imagine. As he concluded his speech, he left the audience with a powerful message. Justice isn't something we wait for, it's something we create. Together, we can build a world where everyone gets to dream, and where no dream is crushed by hate. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing through the auditorium like a promise. For Marcus, it was confirmation that his journey was far from over, but also assurance that he wasn't walking it alone. With Clara by his side, a community cheering him on, and a heart full of determination, he stepped boldly into the unknown, ready to continue shaping a brighter tomorrow. The final chapter of Marcus Thompson's story wasn't one of closure, but rather of evolution, a testament to the idea that justice isn't a destination, but an ongoing journey. As the years passed, the impact of his experience continued to ripple outward, shaping not only his life but also the lives of countless others who found inspiration in his resilience. What had once been a moment of humiliation transformed into a legacy of hope, courage, and collective action. By the time Marcus graduated high school, he was no longer just a teenager with big dreams. He was a symbol of perseverance. His name appeared in headlines, documentaries, and even textbooks as an example of how ordinary people can spark extraordinary change. Yet despite the accolades and recognition, Marcus remained grounded. He credited his strength not to himself alone, but to the community that stood by him, the activists who marched, the lawyers who fought, the strangers who donated, and especially Clara Bennett, whose simple act of bravery set everything in motion. Clara, too, had grown in ways she never anticipated. Once a quiet librarian content with her books and routines, she now found herself at the forefront of a national movement for racial equity. Her advocacy expanded beyond documenting incidents of injustice. She became a sought-after speaker, traveling across the country to share her insights on allyship and systemic reform. Though she initially doubted her ability to lead, she soon realized that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about asking the right questions and empowering others to find solutions together. Together, Marcus and Clara formed an unlikely partnership that bridged generations and perspectives. They co-founded a nonprofit organization called Rise Together, dedicated to mentoring young people affected by racial profiling and supporting families navigating similar struggles. The organization offered scholarships, legal aid, and mental health resources while hosting workshops designed to foster dialogue between communities and law enforcement. It was their way of ensuring that the lessons learned from Marcus's ordeal wouldn't fade with time, but would instead be used to create lasting change. For Marcus, college marked a new beginning. He earned a full scholarship to Duke University, fulfilling one of the dreams he'd written down on that crumpled piece of paper so many years ago. Walking onto campus for the first time, he felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. Would people see him as the basketball star, the activist, or simply as Marcus, the kid trying to figure out his place in the world? To his relief, he discovered that most of his peers were more interested in getting to know him than labeling him. On the court, he quickly established himself as a key player, earning praise from coaches and teammates alike. Off the court, he immersed himself in student activism, joining groups focused on racial justice and educational equity. One of his proudest accomplishments during college was organizing an annual summit called Voices Unbound, which brought together young leaders from marginalized communities to share their stories and brainstorm strategies for systemic change. The event drew participants from across the nation, creating a network of support and solidarity. In the inaugural summit, Marcus delivered a keynote speech that left attendees visibly moved. "When I was 16, I thought my dream ended the night I was arrested," he said. "But what I didn't realize then was that it was just beginning. My pain became my purpose, and your pain can become yours too. Don't let anyone tell you that your voice doesn't matter, because it does." As Marcus thrived in college, the town where his journey began underwent its own transformation. The reforms implemented in the wake of his case, body cameras, independent oversight committees, bias training programs, slowly started yielding results. Complaints against police misconduct decreased, and trust between residents and officers improved, though challenges remained. Activists acknowledged that true equality required constant vigilance, but they celebrated the progress made thus far. A mural painted on the side of a downtown building depicted Marcus dribbling a basketball under the words, "Justice through Unity," serving as a daily reminder of the power of collective action. Evelyn Thompson watched her son's growth with pride, marveling at how far he'd come since those sleepless nights following his arrest. She often reflected on the strength it took to turn trauma into triumph, not just for Marcus, but for their entire family. "We didn't choose this fight," she told a reporter during an interview. "It chose us. But I'm grateful for it because it showed me what we're capable of when we stand together." Her words resonated deeply, capturing the essence of their shared journey. Meanwhile, Clara continued advocating tirelessly, though she occasionally allowed herself moments of reflection. Sitting in her favorite armchair one evening, she flipped through a scrapbook filled with clippings from news articles, photos from rallies, and handwritten notes of gratitude. Each page told a story of resilience and unity, reminding her why she couldn't afford to stay silent. "I used to think I was just a bystander," she mused aloud. "But now I know. I was part of something much bigger than myself." Years later, when Marcus graduated from Duke with honors, the ceremony was attended by hundreds of supporters, including Clara, Evelyn, Daniel Hayes, and members of the Rise Together team. As he walked across the stage to receive his diploma, the audience erupted in applause, some standing to cheer. For Marcus, the moment was bittersweet, a culmination of years of hard work, tempered by the knowledge that the fight for justice was far from over. Still, he allowed himself to savor the victory, knowing it belonged not just to him, but to everyone who had contributed along the way. After graduation, Marcus turned down lucrative offers from professional basketball teams to pursue a career in public policy. He believed that real change happened not on the court, but in the halls of power, where laws were written and systems shaped. Working alongside legislators and grassroots organizations, he championed policies aimed at dismantling structural racism and promoting equitable opportunities for underserved communities. His dual identity as an athlete and advocate made him uniquely positioned to bridge gaps and inspire collaboration. Clara eventually retired from her job as a librarian, but remained active in social justice initiatives. She published a memoir detailing her experiences titled Unexpected Courage, which became a bestseller. Proceeds from the book funded scholarships for students passionate about advocacy work. In interviews, she often emphasized the importance of everyday actions in driving societal change. "You don't have to be extraordinary to make a difference," she said. "Sometimes all it takes is deciding to care, to speak up when you see something wrong, and to stand with those who need support." As decades passed, the names Marcus Thompson and Clara Bennett became synonymous with resilience and moral courage. Schools named auditoriums after them, cities erected statues in their honor, and documentaries chronicled their intertwined journeys. Yet, both remained humble, insisting that the true heroes were the countless individuals fighting quietly behind the scenes. "This isn't about us," Marcus said during a speech at a memorial dedication. "It's about every person who refuses to accept injustice as normal. Together, we rise." Their story served as a reminder that while hatred and prejudice may cast long shadows, they cannot extinguish the light of hope. Whether through acts of defiance, words of encouragement, or simple gestures of kindness, ordinary people possess the power to challenge oppressive systems and rewrite narratives. Marcus and Clara proved that justice often comes from unexpected places, and that when hearts unite, even the smallest sparks can ignite revolutions. And so their journey continued, not as a tale of endings, but as a beacon guiding future generations toward a more just and compassionate world.